All right, yeah, good to see so many people here. I wonder why. Because, you know, one of the things I most enjoy about my life at Google is having the chance to interview some people. We've had amazing people in before, whether it's Richard Dawkins, Dame Stephanie Shirley, the Archbishop of Canterbury, were you there for that? Claire Balding, Tim Berners-Lee, amazing speakers. Well, today's going to be a bit different. No, because we've heard your feedback and you want to hear a bit more about work and business and leadership there. So we're going to start a bit of a series with a theme on that. And I have to say, I'm really delighted with how we're going to kick this off. We're getting down to business with the joy of work. It's a new smash hit, #1 business book bestseller with 30 ways to fix your culture and fall in love with your job again. Now, I'd just like to read you what the publisher says about our friend, the author. Bruce Daisley is the European Vice President for Twitter and the host of the UK's #1 business podcast, Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat. Anybody listen to that podcast? A few people. It's well worth a listen. He's been one of the Evening Standard's 1,000 most influential Londoners for 4 years. Wow. One of Debrett's 500 most influential people in Britain. Campaign Mag asserted he's one of the most talented people in media. He has tens of thousands of Twitter followers. I wonder how he does that. And he regularly writes for such publications as Campaign, Huffington Post and Management Today. Now listen, last time I interviewed Bruce, he ended up with a job at Google. So I don't know what's going to happen today. Please welcome back to Google. It's lovely Bruce Daisley. I'm going to hug you. Come and sit.
So at that interview, Matt said to me, what's your best accomplishment? And I said, am I allowed to be honest? And he said, yeah, go on. I said, I did some decking in my back garden. And I did leave afterwards thinking, I tried the same answer with Dennis Woodside, and it didn't go as well with Dennis Woodside.
Funnily enough, my first question was going to be, do you remember that interview and the answer about
decking?
I've got it written down here. And there's something about people when you meet them who sort of connect in a very human way, and that's what you did. And I think I was saying to Bruce just before, this book is a real triumph of connecting practical advice with the theory and the evidence behind it. And we'll come on to the book. But obviously you've been a bit busy since we last spoke, Bruce. So the book, as I understand it, came from beginning to research, like, how can work be better? Because you were in a bit of a sort of hole with motivation and morale. Can you tell us, like, where it all started?
Yeah, so I used to work here, and I briefly worked in this building, and we used to have an incredible team in the YouTube team. We had an incredible time, loved my time there. And then I went to Twitter, and we started from the ground up. It was like 7 of us, and we sort of built this team. And I made the mistake of hearing some of the people talking about that team, saying it was one of the best teams in Twitter, an incredible place, and I decided that in any way that was down to me. And so I just decided, I must be good at culture. That's me, I'm good at culture, I'm the guy. And then what happened is we went through a really difficult, calamitous period where, rather than sort of people effervescently scurrying to their desks, it was a bit like the Thriller video where people sort of bleep in through the door and then sort of zombie-like stumble to their desk. And I just decided at that point, okay, I need to try and understand the sort of the ingredients of good work and culture. How can I improve it? And here's the mad thing that happened. I started investigating this sort of science of workplace psychology, really. And what I realised is pretty much everything we do in our workplaces is the opposite of what scientists would recommend. And so from open plan offices to the way we construct meetings, there's just like no shortage of evidence about how we're working is wrong. And so it sort of became this obsession, chatting to experts and demystifying the nonsense that sprung up in work. And I turned that into a book, really.
It's a bit of a jump, though, isn't it, from going and talking to a few people for a bit of advice to, well, then podcast. So what triggered you into that?
Yes. So what happened was, I think it was like this subversive thing where I was going to try and fix the culture. I was going to try and improve things. And then you just start chatting to, I just found myself, as a process of learning, I started chatting to people who were experts in workplace culture. So anyone who watches sport if you watch I watch tennis, but if you ever watch like those moments where they show visualizations of where the ball is or where people have been on the court, one guy I chatted to had done that for an office. That's really interesting, right? So he tracked what goes on in offices, and he spent 3 months doing it, and then he said, "Oh, I can actually tell you what's a creative office and what's an uncreative office." So okay, and so I chatted to this guy, and he's like, "So a creative office has far more face-to-face conversation than an uncreative office where people are quiet." And so I was chatting I find myself each week reading the books and then chatting to those people. So it sort of became an obsession, really. We've all found ourselves, whether it's our grown-up jobs or jobs that we've had before, there's moments where there's a real energy to the team you're in, and then there's other moments where there's just something not quite right. And I wanted to know, what's the reason why that team felt wrong and that team felt right? And this science of workplace psychology sort of has all those answers. But the unfortunate thing is, no one who does a job ever gets to hear of any of this evidence. So that was the fascination for me. How can more of this incredible stuff be heard by people in jobs?
That's right, because kind of being a manager and leading teams is sort of an amateur sport, really, isn't it? You don't really get any training or coaching on how to do that stuff, how to make great culture. Is there something that worked for you when you then took it back to the office and tried to change things at work?
Yeah, look, the thing that I'm most taken with, and so it's the dynamic, to turn it into a book was just really an intention of trying to sort of impart some of this. And my obsession is workplace culture. And, the book weirdly starts with these 12 personal interventions. So there's a really interesting phenomenon that's going on right now. So if you go to Google News and you search burnout, the amount of articles about burnout are growing exponentially, and it's almost, if there seemed to be sort of a step where mental health was being discussed last year, I think burnout is reaching that sort of crescendo this year. And there's a lot of articles about burnout, and one of the things that we find about burnout is that because we seemingly made the good decision that felt like a good decision at the time to allow a blurring of the lines between our work lives and our home lives, and it felt relieving at the time. The fact that you could clear some emails while you're in a bit of downtime, but that seems to have had the effect of causing stress levels to be at record levels. And the consequence of living on stress, and if your operating system for work is stress, then it does two things. It kills your capacity to be creative, and secondly, it's unsustainable. You can't continue doing it. So so the book actually starts with like these 12 interventions. But the thing that I'm most taken with is the science of human synchronization. And you and I were talking about it weirdly, coincidentally before. So there's this remarkable thing when you Matt's a rower, so he'll have observed this. But there's a famous anthropologist, psychologist called Robin Dunbar. And he did this really interesting experiment where he got a group of Oxford University rowers, and he got them to row on rowing machines. And then he got another group, and he said, these rowing machines will only work if you row in sync with each other, if you're in time with each other. So far, so straightforward. But the strange thing he found was that the rowers who rowed in sync with each other, scientists do this thing where you can't measure the endorphins in people's body that easily, so they inflict pain upon people. Seems strange. They sort of put, if you imagine like the inflatable armbands that you used to wear as a kid, imagine that, but someone just won't stop putting more and more air into it until you scream and you beg for mercy. And that's what they do. So they inflict pain upon people. But the rowers who'd rowed in sync with each other were able to take twice the amount of pain of the rowers who weren't in sync. And just the same exercise, there's something in our brains when we feel in synchronization with other human beings, it activates something. And you get it if you put people in choirs. You put people in choirs together and you get them to sing for half an hour, and then you say, what do you think of these people? Do you trust them? And people go, I really like these people. Just like there's some sort of, there's some magic that's activated in our brains. You get it when people dance together, but none of those things are easily accommodated into your Monday morning meeting. I recognise that. And so So, but what you also get when people laugh together and when people chat together face to face. So as soon as you sort of understand that there's a human desire to synchronize with other human beings, and there are ways to increase that synchronization, then it seems to be in service of creating better working cultures. So albeit that like the book starts with these 12 interventions, take a lunch break, turn notifications off on your phone. Actually, I'm most fascinated with how we interact as teams, really.
I mean, as I say, it's a really good read, and I think you start very well from the point of like work's broken. I think Gallup says that in the UK we're working 23% more hours than we used to because of this ability to be constantly connected, and you point out how the stress fuels all of this stuff. Some of the things in the book, you rightly say, these are things that I was doing already. Some of them were new things. What were the kind of things that you were doing already that you were reminded to do more of?
So, I think we often feel better for taking a lunch break, but the science of taking lunch breaks is outstanding. I'd heard people talk about turning notifications off on their phone, and I was sort of unsure. But what you find is that one of the things, a third of Brits wake up and think about work the moment they wake up, and what that does is it blurs the lines between work life and personal life, as I mentioned before. And what you find is that our jobs increasingly are about being more creative, right? About doing something more inventive than we did last year, thinking of a way to grow from last year's figures. And when you look into the science of creativity and innovation, stress is a complete antonym to that. It prevents us from being creative. And so this operating system we've got, where the average working day went up by 2 hours a day from taking emails onto our phones. And people who work those additional 2 hours, half of all of those people register the highest registrable levels of stress. And that's the strange thing, isn't it? That, the notion that half of the people in this room are at the highest recordable level of stress and the rest of us must be somewhere on that scale. But none of us feel like that. None of us, we're so immersed in this operating system of stress that, when someone asks you the question, how are things? And you say busy, we don't associate that busyness with the fact that it's preventing us being creative. And so, I knew that taking breaks, I knew that turning notifications off would act in service in that to some extent. But when you read the evidence of the people who've done those things, it makes you realise just how impactful they are.
Well, you started with lunch breaks. Reading the book, one of the great examples you give is call centres and people taking breaks individually versus taking a break together. Maybe tell us a bit about, if you can remember that part.
Yes, so the guy who did that work, so that's the guy who built those Opta stats for workplaces. He started staging interventions. They wanted to know, could they change team dynamics by small interventions? So, they were building the heat maps of where people were and who they were interacting with. And they sent workers in a call centre on a simultaneous break rather than on individual breaks. So, we're all familiar with the idea. You sent someone, you scroll through your phone, 300 screens, you go back to your desk. And they said, what would happen if we sent people on simultaneous breaks? What they found was stress levels went down by 19%. That human synchronization, connecting with other people, seems to really alleviate any of the stress we feel. But the productivity of those people went up by 23%. And to put that in context of a call center, that's more than a decade extra experience. And I think we've got ideas in our head about work. If you look at someone's diary right now and it's empty tomorrow, you think they're lazy, right? If you see someone getting up and going for a tea break, or, it used to be in the old days when people went for a cigarette, and you think, oh, what? You're clocking off. But it seems that when you look at the impact of that, it seems to actually help people's thinking. It helps their sort of mental availability. There's an interesting thing overall. If you look at neuroscience, really fascinating. So neuroscience, sort of the broadest categorizations of neuroscience, categorize 3 systems in people's brain. And the main one is the executive attention network. Sort of that's doing stuff. And the second one is the salience network, and that's sort of running predictions about what's going to happen. You're sitting in here now, predictions are it's going to be pretty safe. And then the third one, and you only really observe this when you give someone something to do and then watch what happens when they stop doing it, is the default mode or the default network. And it's sometimes we get it when we're sort of daydreaming, or we get it when we're not busy. The interesting thing is we've sort of eliminated the default network. Boredom doesn't happen anymore, right? When was the last time you stood there bored? You know, we get our phones out, and I recognise I work somewhere that helps contribute to that. But you know, we get our phones out, we're bored. The interesting thing is when you ask people to say, and I'd ask you to do this, go away, like, here's your homework, class. Next time you have a creative idea, think about what you were doing when you had that creative idea, because the chances are you'll be in the shower, or you'll be waiting for something, or you'll be sort of in otherwise a bored, distracted mode. My favourite example of that is the guy who wrote the West Wing TV show, if anyone's seen that, or he wrote the Social Network film, a guy called Aaron Sorkin. And he came to this realisation that when he was on deadline, when he was trying to get a script finished, he wasn't having his best ideas staring at his laptop screen. He's having his best ideas when he was doing other stuff. He realised he was having his best ideas in the shower. So he decided to have a shower installed in the corner of his office. He says he has 8 to 10 showers a day. And he was asked about it. He's
Cleanest man in Hollywood.
Someone said to him, "Are you OCD?" And he said, "Not remotely. It's not remotely about cleanliness." But he's just found that he was having his ideas when he wasn't trying to put more stimulus into the system. So I think, you know, the more we understand those things, look, there's an imperative. All of us are expected to come up with ideas. And when you're sitting there staring, waiting for inspiration to strike, actually, it's quite helpful to know that that's not how creativity is spawned, I think.
Right, so there's an awful lot you covered there. You're obviously a huge enthusiast for this stuff, but really you were talking about like how breaks make us more productive and more creative,
right,
in a lot of those pieces. But you touched on something which you call murdering the inner mill owner, which is the sort of sense that I ought to be doing stuff, I need to be there, where are all my colleagues? Why aren't they in their chairs? Tell us a bit about that and how that's fighting against what we should be doing.
So to take a step back, so a guy said to me, he said, "Look, I'm meant to be one of the good guys. I'm a progressive employer. I'm meant to be sort of nurturing these things, but I can't help it. Inside of me, there's a 19th century mill owner. And when people aren't at their desks at 3 o'clock, I immediately get angry. I'm furious where they are, and so there's something in that in all of us. About a year into doing my podcast, I sort of turned a few of the things I'd learned into like this 8-point manifesto, little free manifesto. And the first point I put in there was a sort of reaction to what someone in my team said. Someone in my team came to me and said, "Look, I know we don't have like a proper work from home policy, but if I'm struggling to get anything done, can I go home at 3 o'clock and finish it?" And I was really embarrassed actually, because I thought it's just a sign that we turn adults into infants. You know, like we sort of go through this period where we're at college, we're given agency to do what we want, and then we reach our jobs, and you know, whether the mill owner is our boss or whether the mill owner is the voice inside our heads, there's something preventing us pursuing the job in the way that we'd like to pursue it. And so, you know, I put in this manifesto I created, point number 1 was presume permission. Presume you've got the right to edit your job as you see fit. And I think, you know, there's a lot of lies we tell ourselves about our jobs. You know, the number 1 lie about work is that the meeting you're not in is where the good shit happens. And
that's definitely not true.
And like here's the weird thing that happens is that you join work. You know, we're all trying our best. You join work, and like through 3 cycles go by, and you go up a level, right? And you're delighted, you're buzzing about it, and somehow then suddenly you get invited to the next level of meeting, and you're properly made up because finally you're going to hear where all the good stuff happens, and you go to that meeting. It's like the first meeting you think, hang on, maybe that was a bad week. When's the good stuff going to happen? And here's the lie. Meetings are like the worst pyramid sales scheme in history, where you're convinced. I guarantee Matt, when he first went to his like big player meetings, was like, at last, they're going to let me loose on the big boy stuff. And I guarantee Matt's sitting there exactly like you are on Wednesday afternoon at your meeting going, I'm just waiting for the good stuff. And meetings are like this pyramid sales scheme where we're convinced good stuff happens in the ones we're not in.
Well, it's worse than that, because the closer you get to the apex, the more you crave getting back to the front line. It's like, if only I could get out of all these meetings so I could go out and meet users or customers. So there's almost like a prisoner syndrome.
Yeah.
But yeah, so definitely a myth to bust. That's a great lie that we
It's true. I'm convinced that people turn up for their first cabinet meeting and they're like cracking their fingers.
Sure
Like, here we go.
Now, do they?
And it's the worst meeting in the country, I'm convinced of it.
It definitely is now. Definitely right now. But let's not make comments on that, because I don't want to be picked up for any kind of... All politics are welcome here. Whatever you vote, you're all welcome. One of the things that I stumbled across, that's the number one thing in your book, and I should say that the book's sort of written in 3 sections. There's a whole bunch of things to recharge, which is about like just creating the time and space, really. Then you talk about syncing and how we get that kind of connection between people, and then really buzzing. So I'd like to come back to that. But the first thing is having a monk mode morning. And I rediscovered this by accident when I had to go to the osteopath, and they weren't open before 10 o'clock. So I'd go to a cafe and have two flat whites and an avocado on sourdough, hipster breakfast, and I'd just do thinking and work. And it was a joy sitting in this cafe in the sunshine waiting for the osteopath. And I thought, why don't I do that more often? And it was only because I was forced to do it. I was like, oh yeah, this is really good. And it's your first thing, monk mode mornings, sort of being productive in your own space. Maybe talk a little bit about the role of those kinds of things. It's a part of taking control. Like
Absolutely. One of the things that I think we don't tell ourselves the truth about is that the brain is finite. So, like, you know, our brain's far more like the battery on our phone than we let ourselves believe. And so you hear people like Elon Musk, and he says, like, unless you're working 80 hours a week, you're not even showing up. The best thing about that is that he did try and be the poster boy for the 120-hour week just before Christmas. And during the interview, he started crying, talking about how much he loved working 120 hours a week. But here's the thing. So go away and research this at will. But the science of this is called ego depletion. And ego depletion, the best summary of ego depletion was done by a guy called Daniel Levitin. And he says, this is a quotation from his book, The Organized Mind. Don't buy that book. This is the only good thing in that book. And he says, our brains are configured to make a certain number of decisions per day. And once we reach that number, we're incapable to make any more, regardless of how important they are. Right. So there's some arguments about ego depletion, whether there's plus or minus 10%. But broadly, scientists say, in the same way that Albert Einstein said, you know what, if I choose an outfit every morning, it seems to muddy my thinking when I get to the lab. Scientists say our brains are finite, not infinite. So as soon as you realise that, okay, so I've sort of been lying to myself when I did all these meetings, then all these emails, then work late into the night, that somehow all of that was equal quality. You know, it's not. It's zero sum. You know, it becomes diluted. As soon as you realise that, you go, okay, so can I expend some of my energy more productively? So that's what the monk mode morning is. A guy called Cal Newport, he said that effectively we optimize work for what he calls shallow work, emails and meetings. And shallow work seems like we're busy, but it's immensely unproductive. It doesn't accomplish anything. It's just sort of passing pieces of paper backwards and forwards. And he said, you only ever accomplish anything of value by a period of sort of deep concentration, deep work. And so the monk mode morning is the idea that maybe you say, like Matt at the osteopath, but you say twice a week, I'm going to just do 60 to 90 minutes of uninterrupted work, and I'm going to try and remove myself from distraction, remove myself from interruption, and get something of value done. And what you find, actually, if you the biggest survey of asking people when they had a good day at work was done by a woman called Teresa Amable. And Teresa Amable, like a lot of these things, she asked 74,000 diary entries, and people said they had a good day at work when they'd made progress on something meaningful. So that day where all you did was back-to-back meetings and you just about stayed on top of your inbox, it's no wonder that feels unsatisfying because you haven't done anything. She said people feel a sense of satisfaction. They get back to loving their jobs when they do accomplish something meaningful. And so I think that's it. Like the idea that maybe twice a week you set aside 60 to 90 minutes to achieve something meaningful tends to start making you feel like you're loving your job again.
I totally agree with that, and I actually now block time in my diary for what they would call, what he would call, Cal would call deep work, which is like stuff where you really need to get into a space where you can think and sort of ideas can flow a bit.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm better at that in the morning than the evening, so I do it in the morning. That's the kind of thing.
Yeah, and man seems to have a desire for flow. You know, we were talking, some people achieve it whether cycling or whether they're, you know,
playing music or
absolutely getting into a flow state seems to be really satisfying.
Something that Rory Sutherland's quoted in your book that really stuck with me, which is he said, look, probably even 15 years ago, to do anything to do with work, you had to come with work. So come to work. So you had to, if you wanted to print, if you wanted to make a long distance phone call, if you wanted to copy things, if you wanted to use any kind of equipment, you had to do it in the office. Now we can do all of that at home. In fact, I can do it all better at home than I can in the office in many ways because I'm not interrupted. So what do I come to work for? Well, I come to work to do the stuff I can only do at work with other people. So how do we think about how we should spend our time in the day? Maybe we could talk a little bit, once you've got the sort of recharge stuff in a bit of a better place, just around your own energy and so on, how do you think about creating those interactions and the sync that you talked about in a work environment?
Yeah, and there's really interesting, because like the separation between work as a noun, place we go, and work as a verb, the things we do, is a really interesting differentiation. And what you often find is that when people, there was something called the results-only work environment, which effectively was sort of deconstructing work down to a verb, that it's just something we did. And it was done by Best Buy, a sort of white goods retailer in the US. And it ran for about 6 years, where they just said to people, the equivalent of just getting your OKRs, just getting like what you're charged with. And they allowed people to do it in whatever way they wanted. Sort of extreme anarchy, extreme autonomy. And so one guy bought himself a camper van, followed his favourite band around America, doing his job from the road. Someone else became did a college degree and did her work in the evenings. It's sort of extreme autonomy. And they abandoned it after about 6 years because you lose something when people don't interact. When jobs become completely individualistic, you seem to lose the fact that sort of the benefit of a company is that 1 + 1 equals more than the sum of its parts. And so they abandoned it. And so there is certainly a benefit from our interactions. And when you track that, when you track the power of the interactions, it seems like the more that we communicate, the more that we interact, the higher the quality of the work and the higher the productivity goes up. But it's about getting a balance. A lot of us find ourselves coming into work and just doing a series of meetings. The guy who did those workplace opters ran some stats on it. He said he felt that email contributed about 2% to office productivity, and meetings accounted for about 3%. It's interesting, isn't it? If when you go home at the end of the day and you think, I've spent all my day on the stuff that accounts for about 5% of workplace productivity. And so just trying to optimize for more discussion and more debate seems to be a good thing to do, really.
Yeah, there's lots more good thoughts in the book. I want to invite people to, if they want to ask questions, there's a mic in the centre. So do come and ask questions. Before we do that, I just need to ask one myself because I don't want anybody else to ask it. So one of your things is number 7 under sync, which is stop being a bad boss. Bad bosses make you literally sick. They do harm. Talk about bad bosses, maybe not with reference to people you've directly worked with, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
But
so,
what are your observations?
So heart attacks peak on Monday mornings. That's interesting, isn't it? Heart attacks peak on Monday mornings, and it's largely because people find themselves in that Sunday evening dread and the anxiety. So if you ask people what they enjoy about their lives, the lowest performing thing is about work is being with our boss. Spending time with our boss, and it's pretty much the bottom overall. I think people are marginally happier to be with their boss than ill in bed. but it's marginal. So
How do we? So you're a boss, I'm a boss.
Things.
How do we avoid being like that?
Yeah, weirdly, if bosses only do one thing, it's like the mantra should be do no harm. So if bosses are going to remove their interruptions, then doing no harm is the critical thing. But you know, I think the archetypes of bosses that we have are sometimes really bad. You know, they're Gordon Ramsay.
Let's not name names, but
absolutely.
Managed by fear kind of people.
But you know, like, there's a lot of interventions which seem to be net at reducing people's happiness at work, and in fact, weirdly, bosses who all they do is call out the successes of their team, if that's the only intervention, it seems to be better than any other intervention. So.
Okay, and this applies, as a lot of the manifesto applies, not really to sort of CEO level, it's about people day to day making a difference in their own culture, whether you're a manager or an individual contributor.
Yeah,
you can do.
You know, my feeling was it's like a troublemaker's manifesto, because I'm convinced that people who are the bosses themselves aren't responsible for the cultures. You can't call a team meeting to change the culture. You know, culture quite often exists organically. Yeah. And in fact, you know, most of the science, the number one thing to create good workplace culture is something called psychological safety. And it was listed in, there was a Google Project Aristotle that helped popularize it actually, but it was pioneered by a woman called Amy Edmondson. And psychological safety is the ability to speak truthfully about what you're seeing around you. And it's an incredibly elusive, most of us have fear of being judged as either ignorant or disruptive, and so we don't speak up about the things we've got. But you know, if you can build psychological safety in a team, it seems to be the sort of the holy grail of the best working environments, and that psychological safety seems to exist at the team level rather than the company level. So
we see that in the Google Guys results, which is one of the things we try to research, is like how do teams feel, and you absolutely see that.
Yeah.
Let's turn to much better questions from our lovely audience. Hello.
Again.
Yeah.
Hello. I'm Sarah, and I'm just curious because thinking about the meetings and hangouts and emails that I have, us being a global company, there's often the need to check in with teams in other regions or even within EMEA and colleagues. So there are certain meetings or hangouts that we need to have in order to connect. So they cannot be removed, otherwise you don't have the chance to have a coffee or lunch or having that face-to-face contact. So I was just wondering if you had any suggestions around that.
Yeah, I find that those things can be, so the science on those things is that as long as you know the chemistry of those engagements, they can be enhanced. So for example, any team that principally engages online or via Hangouts, if they meet together face-to-face regularly and they optimize for building sync on those engagements, those teams seem to be pretty much as effective as teams who operate in the same offices. One of the challenges, though, is that so face-to-face engagements on Hangouts seem to be almost as effective as face-to-face in real life. But if your interactions with those teams are the default that we tend to do, which is you go to a 60-minute meeting, someone pages through a few Google slides, no one's really engaged with each other, people are on their phones, you find that the energy from those team dynamics can really struggle. The remote aspect of it can make it worse. So I think it's just what you find as well is that those teams can become very tactical. So you don't engage on a human level, you just engage on a sort of task-based level. And it's just being aware of that and prioritizing 5 minutes at the start of the meeting just for chit-chat that you might find. The interesting thing is that quite often when you look at the data on a lot of these things, the things that you might think are superfluous or distractions actually seem to be in service of us engaging with each other on a better level. So face-to-face conversation, even if it starts talking about TV, seems to be more productive than going straight into your bullet points.
Great question, thank you. There's some other questions waiting there, come ahead.
Hi Bruce, thanks for coming and thanks for the talk. I mean, I'm a massive fan of behavioral psychology myself, and I fully understand that, you know, the first step is self-realization and actualization and then impacting the people around you. But I have also a question about generally those changes are a certain level also of control from outside. So institutions in the past have been doing that in government. And as companies are becoming stronger than institutions and governments, I think that focus is now shifting to them in terms of how through their products and what they do in the companies, they're changing or helping people to get to that realization. Yeah. So what is your kind of thinking around that? Like, what can we expect from those factors outside of us, of course?
So go on, summarise it. It was a long question. So summarise specifically which bit you want me to. So companies.
So self-realization and doing something about it is part of it. What about the fact that in the past institutions have been there to help people do that? Because a lot of the time people don't realize that they're in that blind state. So institutions with rules and regulations are actually making sure that people as a mass conform to things that are good for them. So companies today are actually stronger than all these institutions. So there is much more responsibility for the companies to the products and their cultures, how they help people not get into those bad practices. Yeah.
Right. So I'm gonna attempt to answer what I think you sort of ask. So correct me if I'm wrong. So yeah. So you're right. So bigger companies, they quite often they'll have a set of structures and rules that start creating an environment for people to operate in, and either they'll try and change that. You know, you hear about big companies trying to enforce cultural change. It's one of the hardest things to do. But how do you go about mandating that? When I've looked at it, the unit of culture appears to be the team rather than the organisation. So while you can change overall operating principles of companies, it often, one of the people I spoke to said the only culture that exists at a company level is sort of mastered irony. You know, the fact that you pretend to be going along with something that you might not necessarily agree with. So I think trying to permit a degree of autonomy within big corporate values seems to be the most important thing. The thing I will say is that quite often when you talk about workplace culture, you know, some of the go-to people talk about these big sort of movie star, these big Hollywood phrases. So Simon Sinek's probably sort of the big iconic name, and he'll say, secret of workplace culture is answering the question why. And once you've answered the question why, everything else is fine. Well, look, you know, Google's a purpose-led organisation. Everyone who works at Google knows what the mission is. They know what the reason why is. And that, in experience, doesn't help you navigate exhaustion, burnout, frustration. And so to some extent, it's far less Hollywood. But, you know, I think there's as much a question to be asked as how do we work? And so I guess the reason why these 30 interventions here is like, what are the 30 specific things that we can do to feel less personally exhausted and overwhelmed by work? So I think, you know, companies, you're right, do have a role to play. You know, if you look at some of the big tech firms, I think tech firms to some extent have sort of been permitted a bit of misdirection when it comes to culture.
That's where I'm going to.
Yeah.
The products that they create naturally tend to stimulate the behaviors that you're referring to are actually not good for them, yeah?
I mean, look, you know, so Netflix has started the ball rolling where they published their culture document about 15 years ago, and it's this 132 slide presentation that you can read it, and, you know, some of the things in there I think are deliberately jarring. It says things like, if you accomplish an A for effort on your end of term report, but a B for performance, we're going to pay you to leave. And it explicitly says you're not going to be here anymore. So, you know, like they publish that cultural thing. And I think, you know, companies can mandate things at that big level, but I think the realities of work for most people don't necessarily match those big company-wide things. They're far more tactical.
Thank you. Any more questions from the floor? Excuse me while I die up here.
Christ.
I'm honestly doing well.
Thank you for talking. I'm a big fan of both the podcast and your book, your manual. You've run some really successful sales teams, and one of the big things that we monitor with sales teams is the number of meetings they have with clients. And halving meetings, clearly there's a difference between our internal syncing meetings with our teams and our meetings with clients. But how have you squared thinking about client meetings versus other meetings?
Yeah, so important clarification, right? So, if your job is to interact with people, then reducing the interactions with people is not in service of you doing the job better. But what you find with most meetings, so the guy who did that rowing experiment that I talked before was a guy called Robin Dunbar, and he's done a lot of sort of anthropology and psychology experiments. But one of the things he's famous for is this notion of Dunbar's number. And Dunbar's number is the idea that in our brains, in our cerebral neocortex, that part of our brain only allows us to trust 150 people. It's an interesting thing because people came to him a few years ago and said, in light of people having 1,000 Facebook friends, do you want to adapt that? Do you want to adjust that? You seem like you've been found out, Robin. And he went back and he looked at it. In a thoughtful way, he looked at it and he said, no, actually, I'm resolute. People can only trust 150 people. But the interesting thing he said is, when you hit 150, you spend 45% of your time in what he called social grooming, sort of maintaining relationships with people. And it's really interesting because that's about the amount of time. The average British person spends 2 days a week in meetings. And it's about the time we spend in meetings. And it seems like we use meetings quite often as a means to just stay connected with exceptionally big groups of people. And so the more you try and say, okay, we're going to be more intentional we're going to try and reduce the amount of time we spend in meetings. The number one way to reduce time in meetings is to halve the invitees. You can still keep the same number of meetings, but you go from 20 people to 4 people to 5 people. And you just, communicate afterwards what you're doing. But so that's it. Look, so if your job is spending time with people, by all means prioritize that. But I think it's more these things. Quite often, if you ask people what they see the benefit of meetings are, they say, or the benefit is, they say, I see meetings as a tax that you have to pay. It's sort of like it's a cost of being in a big company. And I think as more as you can be intentional about that, saying, okay, can we reduce this tax by trying to be a bit more intentional in the way we communicate, it seems to help that.
But you talk in the book, I think, about a couple of things. One, so trying to reduce the amount of time people spend in sort of unproductive meetings versus kind of the customer interaction types of things. But also you say you should introduce a social meeting, which is the TGIF or the tea time at Twitter, which is actually somehow important in lubricating how people work together. Do you want to talk a little bit about the same at lunch, like have a lunch group of 10 people who don't know each other?
Yeah.
That seems to be an important part of having a meeting that works for maintaining the...
You find if people chat to each other socially in a week, they're 10 times more likely to chat to each other for work reasons. And so it seems to act... The reason why I sort of see these things as... it's like Troublemaker's Manifesto, that anyone can do this. I met a receptionist of a company who'd helped to change their culture. And she'd recognised that people were just interacting with each other on work-based. They're putting meetings in each other's calendar. And I guess it's what generationally the purpose the pub would have served. If you had a local pub that everyone went to, you might have interacted there. And what you find with cultures based on the pub is they're very exclusive, because there'll be the woman who plays soccer on a Wednesday, or there'll be the guy who's got childcare. And while you might be in the pub, there's only a small cohort, a fraction of the cohort in the pub. But what this receptionist did is she said, okay, how about we introduce a social meeting that happens 4:30 every Thursday, exactly like TGIF. And by building the momentum behind it, they found, and weirdly I met about 5 different companies that had done the same. They found it changed the energy in the organisation by making people participate in that, or initially sort of encouraging complete participation in that. They found that people transitioned from this sort of this business transaction into actually relating in
on a human
levels. Yeah.
Fascinating. Hey, go ahead.
Hello, thanks very much. Really, really interesting. I'm really interested to hear more about what you said about boredom, because I think, you see even in child psychology at the moment, children losing their imagination and their creativity because they don't have the same space to be bored as we did. But I also think now we're sort of battling that temptation with, but I want to be distracted. I don't want to be bored. I don't want to sit on a train for hours, not having my mind stimulated. And how do we balance that, or how do we combat that kind of desire of, yes, I want to be creative, but actually I don't like being bored? Is there anything we can do for that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So there was a study published in September, a Stanford University study that took 16 to 18-year-olds, and they took 16 to 18-year-olds and studied those who'd spent time away from their phone each evening, and they looked at the outcome of it, and they found that people who'd given themselves moments every night to be away from their screen and constant stimulation were far more likely to be to have a system perspective, so to be able to think about society for broader themes, and to have imagined their life as an adult. So like they seemed to have the empty space seemed to have been filled with them thinking, constructing ideas and accomplishing things. And you do see it time and time again when people have removed themselves from constant stimulation, our brain seems to organise thoughts and connect things in a way that doesn't happen when we're constantly putting inputs in. So look, I think for me, the first step of any of this is knowing that exists. And so, there was an article in the New Statesman 3 weeks ago that the guy said, maybe we need to channel boredom a bit more. So his thing was turn off your podcasts. I spend an hour and a half every morning listening to podcasts of American politics. I think sometimes I need to turn off my podcasts. But he said, turn off your podcast, turn off Spotify, have a moment where you're just lost with your thoughts, because it will allow you to capture something that's been squeezed out. There's a word for the gaps between things. I love this word. It's called interstices. The gaps between things used to be a thing. And now, I invite you, next time you get in the lift, you press the button, and if the lift doors don't immediately close, you get your phone out, right? Like the gaps to getting your phone out are increasingly infrequent. And I think you're trying to think about how can we leave gaps between things is probably an interesting challenge for us all, I think.
More gaps, that's what we need. Next question. We've just got a couple more minutes left, so next couple of questions, thanks.
Cool. 2 quick questions if I can. First, you used to hate headphones at the desk, Bruce, so I just wondered what your thoughts are on that. And then second question, a deeper question, do you think the modern office should be more or less like a pirate ship?
So headphones are an interesting one, because so the reason why I sort of started getting angry when I was doing this podcast is I met someone who told me the science of open plan offices. And the science of open plan offices, because like you presume, and look, don't get me wrong, I'm not dissing anyone, we're all in open plan offices, right? But you presume, someone's had a bit of thinking when they designed these offices. The science of open plan offices, emails go up 75% when you're in open plan offices. People they interact with each other electronically rather than face to face. That wasn't the plan. And people end up hating their colleagues. And you of all people must have experienced that, Glenn. But people end up in an environment where they're overstimulated and they have too much. So look, I think to mandate that people aren't going to wear headphones is firstly unreasonable, but I think there's a balance. What you find is that when you look at people's circadian rhythms, these certain times of day that seem to be more suited to people interacting. Just before lunch, just after lunch seem to be good times for people to interact. And so my feelings are that at a team level, teams should decide, but teams should maybe say, guys, straight after lunch, let's have an hour, no headphones. Or guys, in the morning, let's just have an hour with no headphones before lunch. And trying to get a rhythm that they all feel like they've got the agency and the autonomy to create, but that is in service of sort of helping people chat to each other more. Your other one was pirate ships. I thought you could. I have no idea.
Don't want to disrespect Glenn, so can you say a bit more about the question?
There was a podcast episode you had where it was just like the
Stan Conniff
talking about the shared goals, the shared rewards, all for one and one for all. I know that's musketeers, but they dress like pirates. It's a bit silly.
I have nothing to
remember that
contribute
one.
to this discussion.
Go back and listen to the podcast. Last question.
Hi, thank you for coming. Quick question. So it dovetails nicely with Glenn's thing. So one of the last points in the book is about laughter at work or keeping it light, lighthearted, having fun. How do you balance that with also not appearing too incompetent? Because it can also backfire in client meetings, right? Sometimes, for example, we as Googlers are a little bit too, let's say, fun and kind of like, lighthearted in meetings where really senior stakeholders will actually find that off-putting and it makes you look less competent. So I'm wondering what your opinion is on that one, and then also does it change from man versus woman, and what's your perspective on the kind of gender angle?
Yeah, thank you. So laughter is a really interesting thing because laughter, as I mentioned before, helps us synchronize with each other. In fact, the leading expert on laughter is an interesting thing where these sort of a fraction of the scientific papers on laughter that there are on anxiety or depression, it's very little studied. But the guy who is probably the world's expert on laughter, a guy called Robert Provine, says we often laugh in one-to-ones about things that aren't necessarily amusing. He sees laughter. He said it's like an impoverished human song. It's like a bird song where we laugh to sort of connect with the people around us. I think sort of trying to optimize working environments where there is a bit of levity seems to improve the relaxation there, improves psychological safety. It makes people feel more comfortable. But obviously you don't want to be clowning around. And I think there's a balance to be struck. If you find yourself bringing custard pies into meetings to press them into each other's faces, you've probably gone too far. I think there's a balance to be struck, but quite often we adopt a work persona, right? We think maybe I'm going to do better at work if I'm a bit more serious and I think trying to get balance and recognizing the value that humor has. There's a brilliant thing in James Comey's book about. He was the former FBI director sacked by Donald Trump, and he says there's a really interesting thing where he'd observed that both Barack Obama and George W. Bush used laughter and humour to relax a room, to lower their status in a room so they make self-deprecating jokes. And they used it to try and create a culture in a team environment where people felt more inspired to contribute their best work. And he said he'd never seen Donald Trump laugh. Donald Trump he said in his words, Donald Trump only laughed. He went through YouTube. And he said he'd found like 2 instances of him laughing, and they were both where he was mocking someone else. And it's the really interesting thing. Laughter is like this incredibly potent thing for us to use to relax everyone, to create a better team spirit. But obviously, as you sort of pointed out, using it appropriately seems the critical thing.
Yeah, I always like the word disarming. I think laughter is quite a disarming thing.
Yeah.
And if people are feeling a bit, on edge or nervous, if you can relax people in that kind of way, as you talked about, it feels like they're opening up and you can create a good connection. But you had a second part to your question, which is, are there any observations on gender differences in the research that you've done that we should be aware of?
So I'm not here to peddle the podcast, but I did chat to Robert Provine on this week's podcast. And he said to me, there's an interesting thing. He said, look, I only entered this to observe it. It wasn't my intention to make judgments. But he said, women laugh more than men. And that women laugh, in all scenarios, women are more generous with their laughter than men. Really interesting thing. And so he was just interested. There definitely seems to be a gender difference. There definitely seems to be a power relationship there, as people tend to laugh less when they're more senior. But there does seem to be sort of different dynamics in the way we use laughter, for sure.
So, Bruce, you've put all this work in, you've done all the research, you've turned it into a book. Did you remember to apply any of it back at the office?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I tell you what I don't do. I don't beat myself up about it. So, taking lunch breaks, really good evidence. I mentioned before, worst time to find yourself in court is just before lunch. Far more likely to be found guilty, far more likely to go down for a long time. So, just after lunch breaks, they seem to do us a good service. But if I don't get 5 a week, I'm not going to beat myself up about it. So I think that's the.
So the inner mill owner is half dead.
Yes.
Inside you. thanks for sharing all this amazing research. I can highly recommend the book. I read lots of these books, some of which Bruce has stolen the best bits and put them in here, which is great. But I've never read a book where the amount of practical stuff that you can do, whoever you are every day, is so compelling. So, Bruce, a huge thank you, not just for being here with us, the podcast, the book series and everything else, but for allowing us to share a little bit of your magic for a few years way back when. And thanks for what you're doing, and we celebrate your success.
Thank you.
Welcome back. What do we do?